Good to see everyone this morning. We are honoring our graduates this morning. I'm going to get out my cheat sheet to make sure I don't leave anybody out. We have two graduated from high school, Tristan Cruz and Hannah Lowe, both graduating from Bremen High School. Miss Lauren Lloyd graduated already, as well as Scott, her brother, Scott Lloyd, also graduated from Faulkner University. They're not able to be with us today. They're working already, if we can call it that. They're working at Disney World, so we'll say working, right? And Todd Spake is with us. Where are you at, Todd? Oh, there he is. Todd also graduated from Faulkner University. Lauren with a BS in Legal Studies, Scott with a BS in Business Administration, Todd with a BS in General Clinical Psychology, and Jacob and Julia Stevenson receiving their MBA from Harding. So we want to extend a congratulations to all of our graduates. This is something that we do each year. This was kind of one of those things that was, I don't think I've ever been a part of that before I moved to, part of anything like this before I moved to Bremen, but I like it. It's something that we do each year to honor these people for their accomplishments, whether it's high school, college, or whatever it may be. Graduation is an accomplishment, and we want to congratulate you on that. Going right with that, what we're talking about this morning certainly has an application to graduates, but really to anybody as well. We're talking about the concept of being childlike, but not childish. There's a difference, you see. Sometimes we'll say, oh, he's childlike in his temperament, or she's childlike in faith, or whatever the category may be. But then other times we'll tell someone, oh, stop it, you're acting childish. Don't act so childish. Now, we understand there's a difference. One has kind of a good connotation, one not so much. And you know, what's often cute in babies is many times just downright pathetic in an adult. It's cute to see babies with their pacifier or sucking on their thumb or something like that, but you see an adult with a pacifier, you say, man, something's wrong with that fella. Something is seriously wrong there. Sometimes children will do things that, even kind of, you get on to them a little bit, and you're training out of that. But at the same time, it's kind of funny. I get in trouble sometimes for that with my wife, because sometimes they do something, and I just have to look away because I've got to laugh. Sometimes it's funny. One time, my oldest it was just Joshua and Levi. Rachel might have been just a little bitty baby. Joshua was constantly at Levi, and one day, Joshua was kind of messing with him, and he just, shoved him, and Joshua went back like a bowling pin. He just toppled over. I laughed. I thought it was funny. I said, you know what? You had that coming, buddy. And, Reagan kind of said, you got to get on to him. You can't just let him do that. So, there are things that are cute in children, even though we'll try to train them out of that. They're cute because it's a child. But again, it's pretty pathetic when you see adults behave in some of the same ways. Growing old is mandatory, but growing up be spiritually, emotionally, and of course physically as well, but we're talking primarily about spiritual growth this morning. 1 Corinthians 13:11, you know the verse. Paul says, when I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, more children, tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine. And then he goes on in verse 15, speaking the truth in love, may grow up into him in all things which is the head, even Christ. Sometimes, we even say to our children as they get older, now y'all grow up. Sometimes they're bickering about something so silly, so petty, and sometimes as a parent, even now, I find myself saying, oh, come on, grow up. And sometimes even adults, we have to say that to one another, right? Sometimes somebody's acting really petty, and you say, you know, you kind of just need to grow up here. So there's a need to grow. In Luke 7:31 and 32, Jesus, he uses, it's an illustration, it's part of a larger context, talking about how you can't please these people, and sometimes children can be like that. He says, whereunto shall I liken the men of this generation? To what are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace, calling to one another, saying, we've piped unto you, and you have not danced. We have mourned to you, and you have not wept. It's the idea, well, we played our music, and you didn't dance. We mourned, and it's kind of, you didn't play the game. And, sometimes children will play these little games, and one of them decides they don't want to play, and, man, the child whose game it is, look out. They're upset, right? And Jesus said that's what the people of his generation, those religious leaders primarily, that's what they were like. Oh, Jesus is not dancing to our tune, and so we're upset about it. Like little children, selfish. There are admirable childlike traits that we want to have, but then there are childish traits that we need to eliminate from our lives. And that's basically the gist of our sermon. Basically 2 points. Childlike traits that we want to perpetuate, childish traits that we want to eliminate. And that's really what we're talking about. And that said, let's just jump right in and talk about some childlike traits that we want to perpetuate in our lives. Don't grow out of these, in other words. One of them is innocence. Children they're innocent. They're free from sin, unacquainted with evil. I know there's a doctrine that says children are born with inherited sin, and that if a child dies and you haven't taken some kind of an action, that child would be lost. And I've heard of people saying in a debate that their children, the size of his pinky finger, one debater said, that would be in hell. And I'm just going to tell you right now, biblically, that is false. That is false as false can be. And I notice that the ones that want to debate that and talk about babies being lost, it's never any baby they've ever known or cared about. Not that makes something right or wrong, the emotional argument, but I just find that ironic. But folks, that's false. The Bible is very clear about this. You don't inherit sin. Sin is not something inherited. There are consequences that may be inherited, and certainly all of humanity has inherited quite a number of consequences of sin down through the years, and particularly Adam and Eve's sin. But we all have sinned as well. But sin is something that you have committed. You've transgressed the law, or you have failed to do something that you should have done. 1 John 3:4, James 4:17, other passages we could go to. Children are free from sin. They're unacquainted with evil. They don't understand. I asked a guy one time who was trying to tell me children are born in sin. I said, what does a child do that is sinful? He said, well, they're always crying, and they mess up their diapers. I said, are you serious? Are you kidding me? I mean, he was dead serious. I said, that is pure ignorance. There is nothing sinful about that. These are children that don't know. They don't have an ability to not mess up a diaper or not to cry. They can't say to you, excuse me, I'm hungry, or excuse me, I'm not feeling well. And so they cry. We understand this. The Bible's very clear. In fact, Jesus says we've got to be like a little child in our innocence, in our attitude, if we want to see the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:3 says, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, this is not a sermon on inherited sin. We could go to a whole lot of other passages, but really that one right there nails it down. I mean, does Jesus say you got to become like a bunch of little sinners to enter into the kingdom of heaven? Obviously not. He's telling us children are so pure, they're so innocent. You want to enter into the kingdom of heaven? You have the attitude, the mindset, the innocence of a child. We live in a fallen world, and there are a lot of bad things in this world. Would it not be great if more people set about to perpetuate in their lives childlike innocence? Certainly it would. What about faith? Simple, trusting faith. You can't beat the faith of a child, right? I mean, they believe and trust their parents to the fullest. I read about a preacher who was, the preacher was writing this. He had been on a long flight. And on this flight, there was a warning of sorts, and sometimes you'll see this where the fasten your seatbelt light comes on. And then the voice said, and this actually happened to me, not nearly to this extent, but a few of these steps, the seatbelt light came on. This was my trip back from Costa Rica this last time. And they said, we're not going to be able to serve any beverages at this time because there's still too much turbulence. And listen, I was not happy about that, by the way. I was on an early morning flight, and I had not had time to get coffee. And I said, I don't care about turbulence. I want coffee. But they didn't care about that either. They didn't care about what I cared about. So anyway, they said, we're not going to be able to serve any beverages at this time. We're expecting some turbulence, and keep your seatbelts fastened. And so the preacher, he's kind of looking around and just observing folks. And, there are some people getting a little bit tense. And, of course, I noticed this as well when I was coming home from Costa Rica that last time, and the same thing happened. But then the intercom said, and this is where it gets different because I didn't experience anything like this. The intercom says, folks, I'm so sorry. We're going to be unable to serve the meal on this flight. There is still some turbulence ahead. And the preacher said, then the storm broke. And he said that airplane felt like a cork in an ocean. I mean, he said 1 minute the wind just took that plane up, and then he said it'd feel like somebody just took that plane and dropped it. And it would, and the preacher said, I've been on some flights. He said, I've done a fair bit of mission work, traveling overseas and things, but he said, I'd never, ever experienced anything like that. There were some passengers that were crying, just weeping openly. Some were just sitting there. They had their hands folded there in deep, deep prayer. Some folks were getting very, very noticeably panicky. But the preacher said he noticed sitting over next to the window in the same little row as him was a little girl. And she was sitting there with her legs crossed, tucked up under her, and she was reading a book. And all this is going on, and he said, she didn't seem bothered by it at all. And he's thinking, this girl can't be any older than 10. And, how many flights could she possibly have been on? Just like a seasoned veteran, but she just doesn't seem bothered. Finally, they get through all this. They land the plane, and he couldn't stand it anymore. They're waiting to deboard the plane, and he finally says to the little girl, he says, you're a brave little girl. I think everybody else on this plane was a little bit concerned there. He said, how is it that you are able to be? And he said, I noticed you're reading your book. Was your book that good? She said, oh, no. Said, my daddy's the pilot, and he's taking me home. Now, that's the faith of a child. Just to assume, you're in a storm that has people who have flown quite a bit scared to death. And she says, I'm okay. That's my dad, and he's taking me home. When you and I go through storms of life, if we have that simple, childlike faith, we can understand our Father is the pilot. And ultimately, maybe not necessarily in this life, when you have that kind of faith, trust in God no matter what. Childlike faith, trust Him for salvation. Isaiah 12, verse 2, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. Childlike faith, trusting God for salvation, for guidance. Isn't that what Psalm 23 is all about? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, I shall not lack. He leads me beside the still waters. He takes me to the green pastures. We've studied Psalm 23 before. It's all about the provision of the Lord and the guidance that He offers us through His Word. He's our shepherd. And when I have childlike faith in God, I trust Him with all my heart. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. Not just calling Him Lord, Lord, but doing the will of the Father. That's Matthew 7:21, as you see on the screen. But every time I think about childlike faith and trusting in God, I think of Deuteronomy 33:27. It's one of my favorite verses of Scripture. God says to Israel, and it applies certainly to spiritual Israel today, the church, the eternal everlasting arms. How many songs do we sing about leaning on the mighty arm of Jesus? leaning on the everlasting arms. That's the idea here. You trust in God, and as Allstate says, it's Allstate's slogan, but it was biblical first. You're in good hands when you're trusting in God. And you put your faith and trust in Him and you obey Him. Wouldn't the world be better if more people had a childlike, simple, trusting faith? Notice, third, compassion. Children are so compassionate. They have very tender hearts that are filled with compassion. Now, sometimes children can be kind of mean, but I think unless they're trained otherwise, most of the children I've run across, they are just so tender-hearted and so compassionate. I read about an author, a lecturer, who talked about being asked to judge a contest for the most compassionate child or the most caring child. And the winner was a 4-year-old. A 4-year-old boy, his next-door neighbor, recently had lost his wife. And the little boy went over there, and as the story went, he went over there and came home, and the mom asked him, said, "Well, what did you do for Mr. Smith?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't do anything, Mom. I just climbed up in the chair with him, and I helped him cry." And that fella decided that was the most caring child. You know, that's a child. Sometimes we worry about what to say, and sometimes in our fear of saying the wrong thing, we don't say anything at all. And sometimes we worry about doing the wrong thing, and so maybe we're just not there because we're afraid we're going to do something wrong. But a child gets it. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do, the most tenderhearted thing you can do is just be there and help somebody cry. Children have such tender hearts. Adults, by contrast, can be so cruel when their hearts become hardened. Boy, it is sad to see some adults, how hardened their hearts have become, how cruel they can be. We should never lose the willingness to share in each other's feelings. That's Romans 12:15. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, weep with them that weep. Sharing in one another's feelings. Ephesians 4:32, Paul says, "Be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you." Luke 10:30 and following, the parable of the Good Samaritan, that's what that's all about. It's a man with a compassionate heart. Two men who had no compassion, their hearts were hardened. They should have been the ones you would thought who would stop, the Levite, the priest. But it was the Samaritan who had the tender heart, and he stopped and he helped because he cared. We should never, ever lose the willingness to share in others' feelings. If more people had childlike compassion, the world would be such a better place. And then let's notice next, we could say forgiving. The need to be forgiving. You know, children forgive very quickly, even oftentimes as if nothing even happened at all, right? You've no doubt witnessed this. Maybe you've experienced it. I know I did several times with my sister growing up, where you are ready and you really, there were times in my childhood growing up, I think if I could have gotten my hands on her, there would have been a crime committed. We'll just leave it at that. Maybe to the point of murder, I don't know. And sometimes literally just a few minutes later, knock on the door, you want to go ride bikes? Yeah, let's go. And it's like nothing ever happened. That's the forgiveness of a child. Two little boys that were playing one time, they got mad at each other, and they were next door neighbors, and one of them went home and told his mama he's never going to play with little Johnny again, and he's done. He don't want to have anything to do with him. So mad at him, he can't stand him. And the next day, he wants to know, can Johnny come over? And the mother said, "Whoa, time out. You said you're never going to play with him ever again. You can't stand to be around him." He said, "Don't worry, Mama. Me and Johnny is good forgetters." And, that's how children are. They're good forgetters. And wouldn't the world be a better place if more people were good forgetters when it came to letting go, stop harboring bitterness and unforgiveness? Forgiveness, it is crucial to Christianity. Notice Colossians 3:13. forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. In other words, you want to be forgiven, you got to forgive. I heard the story of a little boy. This man came up, saw a little boy sitting on a park bench. He's in obvious discomfort. And he says, "Son, you all right?" He says, "Yes, sir, I will be." He said, "What's wrong?" "I'm sitting on a bumblebee." He says, "Why don't you get up?" He said, "I figure I'm hurting him more than he's hurting me." And isn't that how some folks are when it comes to unforgiveness? They think they're hurting somebody else more than they're hurting themselves, even though they're obviously in a lot of discomfort, emotionally, spiritually. But it's kind of the idea, well, maybe I'm hurting him more than he's hurting me. And so you harbor that unforgiveness. How sad. Yet Jesus says in Matthew 6:12-15, after he says, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors," he says, "If you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." You see why we say it's so critical to Christianity? Luke 7:36-50, you have this self-righteous man named Simon. Not Simon Peter, obviously. Just Simon, a common name of the day. He has Jesus in his home. This woman comes in and she's very penitent. She's very grateful she's humbled to even be in the presence of the Savior. She's washing his feet with her tears and her hair. And Simon is sitting there, kind of going like, if he were really the prophet of God that he claims he is, he would know this woman is bad. I mean, she's a sinner. And here he just sits here and says nothing. And Jesus says, "Simon, I got something to say to you." And he says, "Oh, say on. Say on, master, rabbi, teacher." And Jesus says, there were two people. One of them owed a great deal of money. One of them owed a little bit. Their master, frankly, just outright forgave both debts. Hey, who do you think is more grateful? "Oh, well, that's easy, master. The one who was forgiven the most." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Simon, I came to your house. You didn't extend the common hospitality, the common courtesy of washing my feet or even offering a towel, a basin, or anything for washing my feet. But here's this woman, she ceased not washing my feet with her hair and her tears. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven." And of course, the implication is, Simon, your sins are not. You see why we say forgiveness is crucial to Christianity. Well, let's talk about some childish traits that we need to avoid. There are some childlike traits, and no doubt we could add others to that list. That is just a few that came out to my mind that need to be perpetuated in our lives. Don't ever grow out of those. But there are some childish traits that we need to eliminate. For one, the idea of tattling. Man, I mean, those of us who have it, I mean, there is a certain joy that children sometimes seem to have in getting one another in trouble or telling stories in order to gain standing with someone else, particularly usually with mom and dad. Even the 2-year-old in our house will sometimes just, I mean, he can barely even talk, but he can point and tell you, it's him. Discovered in the last day or two, it's not always him, by the way. The 2-year-olds has learned how to say that when it's not always true. But sometimes adults don't grow out of this. Which actually, I looked up tattling and gossip is a synonym. I guess we just call it tattling when it's little children. We call it gossip when it's adults. But sometimes adults just keep on doing that. They don't ever grow out of it. 1 Timothy, if they're not careful, they fall into worldly behavior, and with all learn to be idle. It certainly could apply to woman, man, anybody. With all they learn to be idle, the house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies. Into everybody else's business, right? Psalm 41, 5-7, David talks about those who speak evil of him. They want to know, when shall he die? When shall his name perish? In verse 7, he says, all that hate me whisper together against me. They were trying to destroy him through their gossip, their malicious talk. Leviticus 19:16 says, thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. You see, people who are mature in the faith, they know both the harm and the sin of gossip. Look at Proverbs 16:27 and 28. An ungodly man digs up evil. That's what, you find a bad gossip, and if they can't find evil, they'll dig it up. Digging up dirt on somebody. We even use that expression, don't we? An ungodly man digs up evil, and it's on his lips like a burning fire. Got to tell it. Just lips are on fire until he tells somebody about it. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates best of friends. How true it is. And how pathetic that so many adults, grown, long since moved out, maybe started their own home, own family, and yet they're still so childish, just constantly tattling. How sad, how pathetic, how wrong. Another thing we could talk about that we need to eliminate would be the idea, I put just attention on the slide. I guess attention craving might be a better way of putting it. Being an attention hog, right? This is one of those things that's cute with children because sometimes they'll even compete with one another. They want attention, and they're going to get it. In fact, with the babies, we've noticed here lately, the little bitty one, if you hold the other one, he wants to be held. If you're not holding the other one, he wants down and wants to be able to run. But the minute you pick up the other one, oh, he's all about being held then. It's the idea of I got to be the center of attention. And children crave attention. And you know what? They're going to get it. In fact, if they can't get it being good, they'll be bad. And sometimes it's not okay. And again, we're training them out of that if that's the case. But sometimes children are acting out because they're starved for attention. That's one of those childish traits. They'll grow out of that. They'll understand the world doesn't revolve around them, or will they? Because you see, many adults never outgrow that lust for attention. Paul says in Galatians 6:3, if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. That's the worst kind of deception, isn't it, when you deceive yourself? Somebody thinks he's something, but he's nothing. 3 John 9 and 10 talks about Diotrephes. You talk about a man who had to be the center of attention. He was going to run the show. Old Diotrephes, he loved the preeminence. You go to Colossians 1, who's the preeminent one? It's Jesus Christ. He wanted the Lord's spot. And Diotrephes, his tribe, it persists to this day. And that is so childish. And again, it's kind of cute when a kid will, demand our attention. But it's pathetic in an adult. And some adults just never outgrow that. Mature faith is humble because it's focused on God, not on self. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, Peter says in 1 Peter 5:6, that he may exalt you in due time. Let's make sure we grow out of that just obsession with being the center of attention. I got to have all the attention. Another one that we need to make sure we grow out of is envy. Children often envy one another, sometimes even to the point of destroying each other's things. They'll destroy one another's things sometimes because they're upset, and envious, and jealous. And, again, sadly, some adults are filled with jealousy and envy just like a child. Well, Paul talks about this in Galatians 5:15 and 26. He says, if you bite and devour one another, take heed, watch out, that you be not consumed one of another. You keep that up, Paul says, you're eventually going to just wipe yourselves out. You bite and devour one another. And then he says in verse 26, let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. See, that's the problem with envy. It gets back to a selfish, and that's one we'll get to in just a moment. It's a selfish, I've got to have this, you have it, but I want it, and I should have it. It's not bad to see somebody has something and go, well, that's really nice. I would love to have something like that. But the idea of jealousy and envy is when it gets so bad you begin to harbor ill feelings toward this person. Well, why should he have that and I shouldn't? And even especially getting to the point where if I had the chance, I would take it from you for myself. Children will do that. I mean, they'll do it without blinking. They just get a couple, 2 or 3 children together for just a few minutes and watch it. One of them will have a toy, the other one wants it. He doesn't go and say, may I have that toy? Would it be okay if I play with that for a moment? What does he do? He goes up, takes it, and then watch out. You better be ready to intervene because you're going to have to. But that's what children do. It's childish, pathetic when adults behave in similar ways. Jealousy, bottom line here, jealousy will consume you, and eventually it will destroy you. Jealousy and envy, they'll do that to you. It's going to consume your life. You will obsess over it, and eventually it will destroy you. Proverbs 14:30 says, a sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy the rottenness of the bones. Just like cancer, the bones will eat your bones up physically. Envy and jealousy, they're cancer of the spirit. One of many spiritual cancers. We need to make sure we eliminate childishness, childish envy. What about irresponsibility? Children are irresponsible. They tend to struggle to get serious and get to work. And again, some adults just never outgrow that. It's hard for us to remember, especially as dads, sometimes that children are just children. We take our 4 or 5-year-old boy outside and we got a job for him to do, and sometimes we get frustrated because he gets distracted and he's off, he sees a hummingbird or a butterfly or whatever it may be, and you're going, come on, focus. But he's 4 or 5, and that's easy to forget. Children are going to struggle to get serious. They're going to struggle to buckle down and really do the hard work. But some adults struggle with this as well, and that's why you have Paul saying things like 1 Timothy 5:8, if any provide not for his own, especially those of his own household, he's denied the faith, worse than an infidel. You have him saying, if any man wouldn't work, neither should he eat, 2 Thessalonians 3:10. Because some adults just don't outgrow this. They never get serious and work. Mature faith knows when it's time to work. Jesus said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. 1 Corinthians 16:15, Paul says, watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit you like men. We wouldn't say it that way. That's King James, but he's saying, quit you like men. Work hard. Be men in your work ethic. Be childlike in some aspects, but when it comes to work ethic, be a man. Be a grown-up. Mature faith knows when it's time to work, and also it finishes the job. John 4:34. Jesus says, my meat, my sustenance is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. 1 Corinthians 15:58, he says, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Finishing the work, being faithful unto death, Revelation 2:10, to receive that crown of life. But children are irresponsible. That's expected. We work on that as they get older and older. But let's make sure as adults we know we have mature faith that knows when to work, gets serious, works hard, and finishes the job. Whether that's Christian living. And then finally, let's make sure we eliminate self-centeredness. Children's number one concern is number one. It's self, right? Their world. What do you expect of a child? You don't expect a child to say, children don't come up and say, Mom, how was your especially, little bitty children. As they get older, they begin to do that because they're learning. They're mature. Your 2 or 3-year-old child is not going to say, how can I make your day better, Mommy? They're going to say, hey, I'm hungry. I need this. I want that. That's children's concern. It's their world. They'll often pout when they don't get their way, right? Because everything's about me. That's a child. But they could never be of service to others. They could never help others. You and I, we can't help others when we're focused nonstop on self. And that's why you have Paul saying Philippians 2:3-5, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. And he says, look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. And then he says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. The mindset of humility, the mindset of not being selfish, but being selfless. We need more people who will be selfless. We want to be childlike and perpetuate in our lives innocence, faith, compassion, forgiveness. But we don't want to be childish. We want to eliminate things like gossip, being an attention hog, envy, irresponsibility, and self-centeredness. And here's the thing, when we do these things, we eliminate some of those childish traits and we perpetuate the childlike qualities, we better our own lives, whether it's graduating or just day-to-day living. We also better the lives of those around us. We can better our congregation. Everything is just better when we're living the Christian life. You want to be the best graduate, you want to be the best spouse, you want to be the best child, aunt, uncle, grandparent, be a Christian. That's the bottom line. As we close our thoughts this morning, you may not be a Christian. You may need to come to the Lord, confess Jesus as Lord, give your life to Him in repentance, and be immersed in water to have your sins washed away and added by the Lord to His church. Maybe you've done that and you've wandered away and you need to get your life right with the Lord. Maybe there's some childish qualities you need to get rid of in your life and work on those childlike traits. Maybe we can just pray with you and for you for strength to be faithful. But I want to close with an illustration. I read this was James Hewitt records of a